deep-sea explorers found the USS Hornet in the South Pacific earlier this year. The World War II aircraft carrier was lost in battle in 1942.
Deep in the Pacific Ocean lies the USS Hornet, a ship that disappeared more than 70 years ago. For decades, it was lost to history, hidden under miles of water.
3, 2, 1, splash.
But recently, a high-tech underwater drone discovered it at a depth of 17,000 feet. What they found was not just a wreck, but something that shocked everyone who saw the footage.
I used to stand on the right side of that gun, and that's where my equipment was.
The lost legend of the Pacific. In October 1941, the U.S. Navy welcomed a new warship into its fleet, the USS Hornet, also known as CV-8. She was a Yorktown-class aircraft carrier designed to carry dozens of planes and act as a floating airbase in the middle of the ocean. At 809 feet long, with a crew of nearly 2,000 men, she was one of the most advanced warships of her time. No one could have known then that in just 16 short months, this carrier would take part in some of the most daring and dangerous missions in World War II and vanish forever beneath the Pacific. When the United States entered the war after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Hornet was still a new ship, barely tested in battle, but she would soon be thrown into the center of it. In April 1942, she made history by launching the famous Doolittle raid on Tokyo. 16 B-25 bombers took off from her deck, something no one thought possible for such large aircraft. It was the first time American planes had struck Japan's home islands. Though the raid caused limited damage, it gave the United States a powerful psychological victory. It proved Japan was not untouchable, and it lifted American morale when the country needed it most. Only 2 months later, the Hornet found herself in another key moment, the Battle of Midway. This was one of the most important battles of the entire war. The Hornet joined her sister carriers, Enterprise and Yorktown, in a desperate attempt to stop Japan's advancing navy. Her planes played a crucial role, striking Japanese carriers and helping turn the tide of the Pacific War. Midway ended with Japan losing 4 of its best aircraft carriers, a blow from which it would never truly recover. By late 1942, the Hornet had become one of the Navy's most valuable ships. But her luck would soon run out. In October of that year, during the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands, the Hornet came under relentless attack. Japanese dive bombers and torpedo planes swarmed her from the sky. She was hit again and again by bombs and torpedoes. Fires tore through the decks, smoke poured from her hull, and explosions shook the entire ship. The crew fought to save her, but the damage was too great. With power lost and the fires spreading, the order was finally given to abandon ship. As lifeboats filled the surrounding sea, the surviving crew watched helplessly as their proud carrier burned. 111 sailors were lost in the chaos, either killed in the explosions or trapped below deck as the ship began to sink. Hours later, the Hornet finally slipped beneath the waves, swallowed by the dark waters of the South Pacific. When the smoke cleared, all that was left was an empty patch of ocean. The coordinates of her final resting place were lost amid the confusion of battle. For decades, the Hornet's exact location remained a mystery. Historians, explorers, and veterans searched, but found nothing. The Pacific is vast, and the ocean floor where she sank was nearly 3 miles deep. Many believed the Hornet was gone forever, but time and technology were about to change that. More than 70 years later, a new kind of search began, one that would use modern sonar, remote drones, and deep-sea robots to go where no human diver could reach. The goal was to finally find the lost legend of the Pacific. The search begins. The search for the USS Hornet began more than 70 years after she disappeared beneath the waves. Leading the mission was RV Petrel, a 250-foot research vessel owned by the late Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen. The ship was equipped with some of the most advanced undersea technology in the world. Its purpose was simple but bold: to find the world's lost warships and bring their stories back to life. Over the years, Petrel had already located several legendary wrecks, including the USS Indianapolis and the Japanese battleship Musashi. But the Hornet was different. She was deeper, harder to reach, and hidden in one of the most remote parts of the Pacific Ocean. The search team included a mix of historians, engineers, and Navy veterans. Before they even touched the water, they spent months studying wartime records of battle reports, ship logs, and witness accounts from 9 U.S. ships that had seen the Hornet's final battle. Every document gave small clues about where she might have gone down, but those clues were inconsistent. The chaos of war meant reports were often written in panic, with errors in navigation and timing. The team had to analyze and cross-check everything, trying to find the most likely spot where the ship could have sunk. After endless calculations, they finally drew a large search grid in the South Pacific. The area they marked was huge, roughly the size of a small country. Within it were deep trenches, underwater mountains, and plains covered in centuries of silt. Somewhere in that dark, silent stretch of ocean lay the Hornet, waiting. The problem was depth. The ship was believed to rest about 17,000 feet below the surface. That's more than 3 miles deep, a place where sunlight cannot reach and the pressure is strong enough to crush steel. No diver could ever go that far. The only way to explore it was with machines. So the Petrel's crew deployed their high-tech underwater vehicles, a mix of AUVs, autonomous underwater vehicles, and ROVs, remotely operated vehicles. The AUVs were programmed to glide silently through the blackness, scanning the ocean floor with sonar. They mapped every bump, ridge, and shadow, searching for anything that looked man-made. The data they gathered was sent back to the ship, where analysts studied it carefully, pixel by pixel. Working at that depth came with countless challenges. The cold was near freezing, the water pressure could crush unprotected equipment, and even communication was slow. Every command sent to the ROV took seconds to reach it, delayed by miles of seawater. And every movement had to be carefully planned, as one wrong turn could jam the $7 million ROV into a rock formation or piece of debris. The odds of success were low. The Pacific Ocean's floor stretched endlessly, full of false signals and misleading shapes. Many earlier searches for other ships had taken months or even years. But then, something extraordinary happened. On the AUV's very first dive, a faint shape appeared on the sonar screen. It was massive and unmistakably the long, narrow outline of an aircraft carrier. The crew fell silent as the signal slowly came into focus. After decades of mystery, the lost legend of the Pacific had finally revealed itself. When the ROV descended for confirmation, what its cameras revealed left even the seasoned explorers speechless. The moment of discovery. The moment of discovery began with silence. The remotely operated vehicle, ROV, was slowly lowered into the black water, its steel cable unspooling yard after yard. It took more than 2 hours for it to reach the seabed, descending through pitch darkness where no sunlight had ever reached. The water temperature dropped close to freezing, and the pressure outside the ROV's metal shell was enough to crush a submarine. Inside the control room of the RV Petrel, every eye stayed fixed on the screens as the live feed came through. At first, all they could see was emptiness. The ROV's lights revealed only drifting particles like snow in slow motion. Then, after several minutes, the sonar started picking up faint shapes. The pilots adjusted the ROV's thrusters, guiding it forward inch by inch. Suddenly, a dark shadow appeared out of the gloom. Floodlights cut through the blackness, and a massive shape began to emerge. It was the bow of a ship, tilted slightly to one side but still standing proud. As the ROV moved closer, the features became clearer. The explorers could see railings, catapult tracks, and gun mounts. Each detail confirmed what they had hoped for but barely dared to believe. The ROV hovered over the deck, its lights sweeping across the wreck like a searchlight through time. The control room was completely quiet except for the hum of computers and the soft voices of the pilots calling out coordinates. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The camera panned along the side of the hull, revealing layers of rust, coral, and marine growth. Suddenly, through the haze, a faint marking appeared. It was the number 8. still visible after all these years. For a second, no one spoke. Then the realization hit. They had found the USS Hornet, CV-8. Emotion flooded the control room. Some of the crew clapped quietly while others simply sat in silence, overwhelmed by what they were witnessing. After more than 70 years, the Hornet had finally been found. She was not broken into pieces or buried in mud. She was sitting upright on the ocean floor, as if waiting for orders that never came. Her deck was still recognizable, her structure mostly intact despite decades of pressure and decay. As the ROV moved over the wreck, it captured details that sent chills down everyone's spine. The anti-aircraft guns were still pointed toward the sky. The aircraft elevators were locked in place. Sections of the flight deck were torn apart, evidence of the brutal attack that had sunk her. Yet the Hornet still stood like a warrior standing tall even after defeat. Transition. But as the cameras moved closer, the team realized the wreck wasn't just a relic. It was a haunting time capsule from humanity's darkest hour. The time capsule beneath the waves. The RV Petrel's cameras showed a ship that seemed to have paused in time. Despite the weight of the ocean above her, the Hornet's shape and structure were almost untouched, as if the sea itself had decided to protect her. Her anti-aircraft guns were still in position, pointing upward toward an enemy that would never return. They stood like silent soldiers, locked in their final stance. One 5-inch gun turret remained perfectly intact, its barrel aimed toward the surface as if still guarding the skies. Every weapon, every shadowed corner told a story of sudden chaos that had ended in silence. As the ROV drifted across the deck, it revealed sights that filled the crew with both awe and sadness. An aircraft tug still stood upright on the flight deck, frozen mid-duty, ready to move planes that would never take off again. Nearby, 2 aircraft rested exactly where they had fallen during the battle. A TBF Avenger torpedo bomber lay half buried in silt, and its propeller still visible. Not far away, an SBD Dauntless dive bomber sat with its wings neatly folded, just as it would have been before takeoff. Time had stopped the moment it slid across the deck and disappeared into the deep. The ROV then moved inside the ship. The light from its lamps revealed scenes that looked eerily human. In one corner of the crew quarters, a uniform jacket still hung from a hook. Dust and rust had eaten away at the fabric, but its shape was still clear. A toothbrush was found inside a wash kit, exactly where someone had left it over 80 years ago. Drawers were half open, bunks were still lined up, and equipment lay scattered as if the men might walk back in at any moment. Inside the bridge, the controls were still recognizable. The telegraphs and steering wheels were coated in a thin layer of silt, but their design was unchanged. Even the captain's chair, though covered in marine growth, still stood in its rightful place. It was as if the Hornet had chosen to hold on to her last memories, refusing to let go of the world she once belonged to. Every image reminded the explorers that this was more than just a wreck. It was a time capsule holding stories of courage, fear, and sacrifice. But this discovery was not only about machines and metal. It was about the men who lived, fought, and died aboard her. The men who came home. Among the men who served aboard the USS Hornet was Richard Novatsky, now 95 years old. He was one of the last living sailors from the ship's final crew, a man who had seen her rise and fall during World War II. When researchers from the RV Petrel showed him the underwater footage of the Hornet, his wrinkled hands began to tremble. He leaned closer to the screen, eyes wide with disbelief. Then he pointed to a small gun position on the port side and said quietly, "That was my station." As the ROV footage played, Richard's memories flooded back. He spoke about the day in October 1942 when the Hornet met her end during the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands. He said it began as a calm morning. But before noon, alarms sounded across the ship. Dozens of Japanese dive bombers had broken through the clouds above them. The crew rushed to their battle stations. Richard remembered the sound of the ship's guns filling the air, followed by the high-pitched scream of enemy planes diving straight toward them. The first bomb struck the forward elevator, sending a blast of fire and metal through the hangar deck. The second hit ripped open part of the flight deck, throwing men off their feet. Richard said he would never forget the smell of burning fuel and the screams of trapped sailors echoing through the corridors. Despite the chaos, many still fought to put out the fires and man the guns. Each explosion shook the entire ship. When torpedoes finally hit her side, the Hornet began to list heavily. Richard remembered the deck splitting open and the floor tilting beneath his boots. Orders came to abandon ship. Men jumped into the burning water below, some covered in oil, others clutching floating debris. Richard was among those who survived, rescued hours later by an escort destroyer. Many of his friends did not make it. 111 sailors went down with the ship, lost forever in the dark waters of the Pacific. Richard said the last image burned into his memory was the Hornet's mast sinking beneath the flames, still flying the stars and stripes. He said it felt like watching a living being take its final breath. When he saw the wreck footage in the 21st century, he recognized that same flagpole. It was bent and covered in rust, but still standing tall on the deck. The old man's voice broke as he spoke. "It's like they're still there," he said, wiping his eyes. To him, the Hornet was not just steel and machinery. It was a memory of young men who never came home, frozen in time at the bottom of the sea. The way the deep ocean itself had chosen to keep their story untouched for more than 70 years was what was going to shock the world. The footage that shocked the world. Engineers aboard the RV Petrel handled the USS Hornet's discovery with the utmost care. Each movement of the remotely operated vehicle was slow and calculated. The team knew that even a slight mistake could disturb the wreck or cloud the view with stirred-up sediment. They guided the ROV's arms like surgeons, recording everything in high definition. Every spotlight beam was adjusted carefully to reveal details without damaging what had been preserved for more than 70 years. The expedition gathered over 300 hours of footage. They mapped every visible section of the carrier, from the hangar deck to the gun mounts and crew quarters. The images were so clear that experts said it almost felt like looking back through time. The wreck appeared as though it had simply fallen asleep under the ocean. Marine scientists explained that the deep-sea environment had acted like a natural vault. The freezing temperatures, complete darkness, and lack of oxygen slowed down corrosion to almost nothing. Even some paint markings and insignias were still visible on the hull. It was as if the Hornet had been frozen in a moment, perfectly preserved by nature's own hand. But the discovery was not only about technology and exploration. It carried a heavy emotional weight. Historians and Navy officials reminded viewers that the Hornet was also a war grave, resting place for 111 sailors who went down with her during the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands. When the footage was released publicly, families of the fallen gathered to watch. Many sat in silence, their eyes fixed on the screen. Some whispered the names of fathers, brothers, or uncles they had lost long ago. Others simply reached out and touched the image of the ship as it glided across the screen. Shortly after, the U.S. Navy decided to keep the wreck's exact location confidential to protect it from treasure hunters or unauthorized visitors. Officials stated clearly that the Hornet would remain untouched as a mark of respect. One Navy historian summed it up best: "The Hornet belongs to history now, and to the men who never came home." Yet as researchers reviewed the scans more closely, they noticed something strange deep inside the ship's remains. It was a hidden clue that challenged what historians thought they knew about her final hours. The secret inside the wreck. Deep inside the forward hangar bay of the USS Hornet, the ROV's sonar detected something odd. Among the fallen beams and scattered debris, a bright metallic reflection stood out from the surrounding wreckage. At first, the operators thought it was another piece of twisted structure. But as the cameras moved closer, a clear shape began to form. It was the body of an aircraft, surprisingly well preserved. When the floodlights illuminated the wings, the team realized what they were looking at: It was a B-25 Mitchell bomber, the same kind of plane used in the famous Doolittle raid on Tokyo. The discovery immediately drew attention from historians. Records showed that no one believed a B-25 had remained aboard during the Hornet's final mission. But the ROV's footage told a different story. The plane's serial number, partially visible under layers of silt, matched Navy maintenance logs, showing it had been marked for redeployment shortly before the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands. The aircraft had likely been secured in the hangar when the attack began and went down with the ship. What truly surprised the team was what they found inside the bomber. Several cylindrical containers were visible in the footage, each sealed tightly and labeled with faded red stencils that read, "Top secret, do not open." Though the text was hard to make out, it was clear the canisters were official military storage units. Experts reviewing the images believe they might have held classified equipment or experimental weapon components meant for later missions. The presence of such sensitive material suggests that the Hornet had been preparing for something larger before she was sunk. Some historians think this might explain why Japanese forces targeted her so fiercely during the Santa Cruz battle. Intelligence reports from that time hinted that Japan suspected the carrier was carrying high-value cargo. The new footage gave strength to that theory. For now, the canisters remain undisturbed. The U.S. Navy has chosen to leave the wreck untouched to honor the men who died there. What lies inside those containers remains unknown, locked within the silent steel of the Hornet's hull. But now the Hornet rests not just as the grave of legends lost, but as a place that there is suddenly and unexpectedly there is life. Life in the grave. After the discovery of the USS Hornet, scientists began studying the area around the wreck, and what they found surprised everyone. The ship had not simply sunk and vanished into the seabed, it had become part of the deep ocean itself, a foundation for new life to grow. The Hornet had turned into a thriving ecosystem. When the ROV's powerful lights swept across the wreck, the cameras revealed a scene unlike anything the crew had expected. Coral-like organisms had attached themselves to the hull and flight deck, forming strange, colorful shapes that looked almost alive. Clusters of white crabs crawled along the old anti-aircraft guns as if guarding their posts. Tiny fish darted through the openings of the hangar bays where warplanes once stood ready for launch. Even at that depth, where sunlight never reaches and temperatures hover just above freezing, life had found a way. Deep-sea jellyfish drifted around the Hornet's mast, their faint glow casting soft light across the steel remains. Some of the species seen on camera had never been documented before. To oceanographers, the Hornet had become a living laboratory, proof that nature could reclaim even the darkest and most forgotten places on Earth. The scientists on board the RV Petrel were both amazed and moved. One marine biologist described the site as a world between life and death, explaining how the Hornet now supported entire colonies of marine creatures that could not survive anywhere else. The ship's metal, once built for war, had become the backbone of a fragile but thriving underwater community. Researchers believe the Hornet will continue to change over time as marine organisms slowly cover more of her structure. The discovery also gave them valuable insight into how human-made objects interact with the deep sea. Even in a place where pressure can crush submarines and light cannot reach, life still adapts, spreads, and thrives. For the crew of the Petrel, the experience was unforgettable. What began as a mission to find a piece of lost history turned into something deeper. The wreck was no longer just a war grave. It had become a reminder that even in death, there can be renewal. And as the ROV made its slow ascent, its lights faded into blackness. The Hornet remained below, silent but alive in a way no one had imagined. What do you think about this discovery? Comment down below.